today for conversation on the deep dive on mediation, part one. What do we call it? Research and the start is Don Kuhlman. Welcome, Don. How you doing?
Thank you for having me. This is fun.
Yeah. Well, the first time we were together was you called in. You're located in the States. You called in. We didn't see each other. You weren't physically at the station. I was going to send you a chauffeur to pick you up to bring you to the station, but I don't know. You said you were busy or something. I don't know. So this is an opportunity with the Zoom version. It's more interactive and engaging. That's my experience. So it's a better way also for the people sitting in the bleacher seats tonight in attendance, that they can get a visual context of us. And then afterwards, there's a video recording. So there'll be a greater opportunity for people to, appreciate the commentary that we're going to try to contribute to make meaningful tonight, at least on my end. I know you will, for sure. So let's share what's a hobby about yourself that people may not be aware of, that you're now going to be totally telling to the world.
Well, so I feel like I can never just answer a question. I always have a story with it. So if I start rambling, just do that. But so when I first met my husband, like 20 years ago, just some real quick backdrop, he and I both came from really poor families. And so he's, keep in mind, we're in our 20s, and he makes this comment that he would like for us to be a millionaire by 40. So we had no idea what that would actually look like or what that would entail, but we started buying investment properties. So we currently own 7 investment properties, and we paid cash for all of them. And we live very, very frugally. And then this has now led to, I do some blogging, and I've done a couple, they're called Ed Talks. They're our local community college. I do a lot of mediation trainings for them. And so they let me just do anything I want. But anyway, so I said, hey, I want to do these Ed Talks, and I want to teach people about investing money. And they're like, all right. So they record me and they let me do these Ed Talks. And I talk to people about investing money. And I think everyone can appreciate a really good underdog story, because that's what that is. It's 2 poor kids who fulfilled
Made good.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So you and I had a first conversation together. You called in from the States. Where are you in the States?
Missouri. It's right in the middle of America.
And you're 1 hour time difference from Toronto time, so it's just after 7 p.m. your time, relative to us being at 8 o'clock. So does that mean we're ahead of you?
Yes. Like
just in everything in the world?
Yes. So as it stands right now, Missouri actually has made, Laura says we can tell her the future. And so Missouri is the hot spot right now for COVID again. So literally everyone else is ahead of us. Like, we can't get that figured out. But anyway, that's a different story.
Well, for sure, we're doing our social distancing.
Oh my, yes. See, this is the one good thing that came out of the pandemic. I feel like the world just became so much smaller.
Through the online and the remote stuff. Yeah. Give a little sense too of your professional journey. What's happened for you to be at this point in your life?
How did I get here? So some real quick backstory. I think it's a kind of funny story. So I went to graduate school and I graduated. I have a master's in clinical psychology. And the irony with that degree is that you can't actually practice psychology with it. Like, that degree, you literally have to go on and find something else to do. There's no licensure for it. It's like things I wish I would have known when I went to school. But anyway, So I graduate with this master's degree, and in the meantime, I had met my husband, and I was in Ohio, which is kind of closer to you. Um, and so he says, he lives here in Missouri, so I move out here, and he's like, you got to get a job.
This is before the investment stuff, right? Yeah.
And so I'm like, yeah, because we need health insurance. So I applied for the court. The court was actually just one block away from our starter home. And I walked to work. And so I apply for this job. I literally have no idea what mediation is. God as my witness. Like, it's 2003. I have no idea what mediation is. And I'm sitting there telling this lady that's interviewing me, I'm like, I was like, I just need this job, and I promise I won't let you down. And to this day, she'll still tell you that story. She was like, it was the best interview, and I just knew you weren't going to let me down, Dawn. And so she took a chance on me, this girl that knew nothing about mediation. And so I was trained in 2003, and then I was trained in domestic in 2004, and I did small claims, landlord tenant, domestic stuff, did the parent education program, did all that for the court for 9 years, and then left and started my own LLC in 2012. And in between all of that, just did a ton of adjunct work and anything that paid. And then in 2019, I became the director of a statewide mediation program called March Mediation.
And our first conversation was on trauma-informed mediation that you also provide as a training.
Yes, I created in 2018, I did a TED Talk and created and shared with everyone my trauma-informed mediation model.
Hmm.
So,
And yeah,
yeah,
so
over 8.
you work with people,
Yeah.
obviously, with who are looking to help other people who are experiencing conflict. Why do you intentionally put yourself to do so?
Um, I love it more than anything else. And I I am one of the blessed and fortunate people who get to say that I do mediation full time all the time. Like, there's not a lot of people who get to say that. I feel like it's an honor to say that, in the sense of I get to do trainings, I get to do research, I get to actually provide the service. Like, I've been able to make a career out of mediation because my heart's in it. It's where my passion is. And, for a lot of folks, mediation is often just a subset of another profession. It's something they kind of do on the side when they want to take a break from practicing law. Then they do mediation, or they, you know, it's a spin off of the therapy. They do some other service. So, I think there's an honor in that I get to do that all the time. I get to focus on mediation all the time, um, and it honestly, I just always think about, how can we improve processes? How can we make something better? How can we better serve the people that we are working with? And so all of that, recently I got a new intern, and she was like, Dawn, your brain never stops. I was like, no, it's a curse. But um, I think it's fun to always think about ways for something to be improved, and for, um, I'm probably more into creating processes, which in turn just help people. So,
Which I would say from process is about creating opportunities,
yeah.
providing the opportunities for those people that you're assisting and working to support to help them connect with a means or a pathway to create a better opportunity in their lives. So what do you see, what do you hope happens from your efforts with people in conflict?
I think, just to kind of take a couple steps back with this, I think mediation has a huge PR problem. Okay. Like, we don't have enough, people don't understand what mediation is. They, I'll give you some real quick examples. When people call my office, so like I said, we're a statewide provider. So we have a 1-800 number, and people call. people think that we're taking their kids. People think that we're doing all of these things that we're not doing. They think that we can just like that all the information can be subpoenaed and share with the court because they want to prove like they want to use this as another tool.
Yeah.
And so I feel like if I could accomplish anything in life, it would be just to help people better understand what it is and what it isn't. You know, I went one day and I literally spoke for six different classes up at the local high school, and they were all seniors. And so these are all kids that are, you know, going to go to college, and because it's like an advanced English anyway. So none of them knew what mediation was, you know, and I thought, well, this is how can we better educate on what it is? I don't know. That's a discussion for another day. But
Well, part of today too, for sure.
yeah, I mean, that's the start, right? This is the start.
That's what we're, yeah, that's what we're presenting about.
Maybe
We're,
it wasn't a ramble. Maybe this actually had some relevance.
it's all going to be connected. You
It's all
know,
going to be
by
connected.
the end of the conversation today, you're going to see a direct link with what we're talking and what we're sharing and then what we're hoping to build upon, because this is not solely the only conversation we want to do.
Yeah. And I would like for people, when I say people, I don't know who people are, but you know, when I teach my mediation trainings and I'll say, you know, tell me what you think mediation is. And people will start off with this, it's a conflict resolution process facilitated by an impartial. And I'm like, no, like something that the average person can understand. Like, you know, sit down and we help people talk or we facilitate conversation. I don't know. I'm still looking for that punchline.
I think it's an evolution. So, you know, my background is in community mediation in Toronto, North Toronto, and working in diverse community. And it was always a continuum to see, you know, what we were doing, what I was doing,
Yeah.
and how I was connected with, then to see, is there another way to do what we do, how I do it, etc., to keep challenging, to provoke for change. And that's, I'm really about social change, trying to create more inclusive systems, societies that especially recognize and acknowledge the diverse nature of society overall and community. And so it's a continual thing for me to question what I do and how I do what I do.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. How can we keep doing it better?
Yeah, yeah. Just because I'm not one to settle for the status quo. And you know, when people say, or that they're expressing about challenges, and then, okay, so what do you want to do? Well, this is the way we do it. This is the way it's done.
Yeah.
I get somewhat uncomfortable with that because that's not my mantra. That's not my intention. It's just because doesn't need to be the status quo to remain so. You know, not be a traditionalist, be a provocateur, be an agitator,
Yeah.
be a disruptor. I now see all those as positives. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do people find out about, you know, the service you do and the work you do?
You know, it's a lot of collaboration with the courts, a lot of just trying to have a presence. And I feel like this is having a presence in the courtroom and having an online presence. But I feel like the biggest is just the collaborations that we have. Today, as we talk about some of the research, that was one of the fun things about the research study was having outsiders come into my world. And you know, they're interviewing every entity that we collaborate with, and they're interviewing all of the mediators, and they're interviewing the parties. And so again, the researchers had no idea what mediation even was. So it was amazing to watch these two gals grow in this whole research process in terms of like they would just interview people for hours just to better understand it. And you know, now they're sold on mediation, like they just think it's the best thing ever. So now I'm like, you guys got to get trained in mediation now. but they have masters in public policy. That's what their degrees are in. And so they're just trying to get their brain wrapped around, policy changes or thinking about, again, how can we improve mediation from that perspective of it?
And how to put attention on the current status quo, what the system does relative to what it doesn't do,
Yeah.
to see how it could be transformed in a way to adjust. So with policy, that they can create new measures that can be injected into the system that they then can feed into the system and the people that enter into the system to try to find a way to better assist and support people.
Yeah.
And, the constant struggle is about what you talk about, the messaging. In community mediation, where I'm from, we call it like outreach,
Yeah.
PR, public
Yeah.
relations, outreach, going out there and messaging, going into the community where people are at to, adapt the message according to the community that we're speaking with. Because the worst is to go and say the message only from one's point of view that has no connection to resonate with the audience. And like you said, when people came in and you said, "What's mediation?" and they gave you this layered way of saying it, let's get it down into a fundamental language where we can actually connect and hear each other.
Well, and that's, I think the outreach component is, I mean, I hate to use the word we have to sell it, but we have to sell it. Like it's got to be sold. We got to get people to find an investment in it. And so, I have the staff will go. The courthouse is literally right behind me here, and I keep looking over here because this is where my staff sits. But that the staff goes over to the courthouse at least 2 to 3 times a week to meet with people, just so we can have a touch point. Because I feel like it happens at the individual level in terms of, this is someone who can help you. And then that person actually seeing a face and is this person really going to help me, and establishing trust. And there's just a lot to that.
And with doing the outreach, it's a constant active
Yeah.
role and need, because just because you may have spoken and presented about what you do, how you do it, and see how it would benefit the people you want to present that to, you keep into those and you build relationships, connections,
Yeah.
because you want to reinforce this whole message, and also get people to appreciate what you're trying to do. So it's about building trust too with the messaging.
It is.
So the two of us have had a few recent conversations through Zoom, and it started when I reached out to you at one point, and I was presenting about two possibilities about the trauma perspective to have a conversation about. And then it evolved into other things, including research on mediation process and practice that you've been involved with, and that we're going to unpack some tonight.
Yeah.
So we figured out to make these conversations into a series of shows to open up for discussion about the what and how of mediation. We also have talks in process about doing a tour. So it's our little, we can't speak about what we want to call the tour. Hey, come on. And though that is another topic or matter that relates to the free-flowing manner that you and I have connected with. So let's start with the research piece. What's the research work that you've mentioned about, and that I think it's important to present for people?
Yeah. So I think everyone is sick of the word pivot, but I'm going to say it. So we had to pivot just like everyone else when the pandemic hit. And so we were already providing virtual and phone mediation, but obviously nowhere at the level that we're doing it now. And so when we made that, we had to keep providing services. And so just real quick, We are a nonprofit that's actually funded, though, through a federal grant. So, in order for us to get paid, we have to actually do a service. It's a service provided, right? So, if I have staff, like, we have to keep the lights on. So, this was not an option for us to just, oh, no, we're not going to do mediation anymore, right? Like, this was like, no, we've got bills to pay. So, we have to keep money coming in. Let's figure out how to do it. So, that's when obviously we switched to phone and virtual, and then we still allowed some of our mediators, if they wanted to do in person, they could. And that's, but also looking at that, because now we're wearing masks, there's distancing in the room, there's lots of different things that are happening. And so I received a call, and it was from a gal in Washington, D.C. And I'm not going to lie, but whenever you get a call from someone in DC, it makes you feel like you're pretty cool. Like, I'm in the middle of nowhere in Missouri, and someone from DC is asking me how we're doing stuff here, and they want to do some research on it. And I'm like, this is amazing. And so it actually, it's the, so American University is located in DC, and they have what's called the Justice and Government Project. And they do a ton of research and looking at pilot projects and innovative court programs and all sorts of things. And they had received some funding from the Pew Charitable Trust to look at our project, to do our project. So we did not make any money, but it paid the researchers to do their part. So this was really, it was a lot of work that we did for free, but it's been a lot of fun, and I'm so glad we did it. So we gathered data for about 3 months, and we looked at the effectiveness of the 3 different methods of mediation. And can I go ahead and do the spoiler alert? Can I go ahead and say what we found?
Oh, I don't know. Let's keep that on pause for a
Keep
moment.
that down.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Let's do a
but
cliffhanger here.
I um I think one of the things that I do want to just highlight is that there is this element of quantitative data that we gathered, which is really helpful in the sense of saying, this is what we found here. But I'll be honest, the part that I thought was amazing was all of the qualitative data. And that, bless the researchers' hearts, that takes a ton of time because, like I said, they were interviewing a lot of the court that we collaborate with in terms of the judges there. They interviewed the mediators and they interviewed the parties. But one of the things that I think was just fascinating as I was reading through all of these quotes, this post mediation in terms of why people found certain things to be helpful, I feel like for a lot of us as mediators, that's sort of the benefit of mediation is I hate to call it a sort of one and done, but oftentimes you serve these folks and then they're on to the next, right? And there's a sense of, okay, I've done my job, and you don't really ever know what people thought, what they thought, what went well, what didn't go right, hearing it from their perspective. And so I think that was the most eye-opening portion for me. And I have some good quotes that I'm going to read later from both the mediators and the parties in terms of their perspectives with different types of mediation, different methods of mediation. And so I think when we think about research, I think quantitative and qualitative are both so valuable to gathering data.
Yeah, and just to explain, just for the benefit of anyone, quantitative is more related to the numbers, the statistics, the hard tangibles like that. And the qualitative is more about the anecdotal, the stories, the lived experiences of people. How was that for you? What was it like? Et cetera, et cetera. All those open-ended pieces.
Ah, that,
Yeah.
the heart wrenching, that's the stuff. Those are, yeah,
Yeah, data, I mean, data speaks well.
yeah,
And a lot of funders, that's what they rely on.
yeah,
They want statistics. They
yeah.
want to know, quote, what's the success of your process? Because
Mhm.
if we invest and give you the grant, we want to know that we've invested right because we have accountability. Maybe it's funders or benefactors who provided people, the money, and
Yeah,
they want to know there's hard outcomes from the funding support. The anecdotal ones, though, those are the ones that really, as you said, touch your pull your
Mhm.
heartstrings and
Yeah.
really speak more volume. It takes the numbers and puts words to that.
Yeah, and that ended up being my favorite part of the study, and that's where I feel like I learned a lot more in terms of the effectiveness of it from the anecdotal portion.
So with the research, and it's focused on mediation and process and the forms of process.
Yeah.
So what's the
So
goal with that?
so basically we wanted to know is what we're doing, is it working? Is it helpful? Is it effective? Because I think everyone made this change just because we had to. But and I think the big theme that I'm hearing and that I don't think we're gonna go back. We're gonna continue to offer all three methods, even post-COVID, just because partially what we found. And I think that's the thing. We just sort of made all these changes, but we didn't really know if they were working. And a lot of people, even our researchers, they were like, we didn't put any merit in the phone mediation whatsoever. And then they changed their minds. We'll talk about that later.
I remember so much from my community mediation days that a lot of the initial contacts were made through phone calls
Mhm.
and doing what we called intakes on the
Yeah.
phone, getting okay. This is what we do, how we do it, and what's going on for you. How'd you find out about us? And then you try to sell it. Basically, you try to bridge it if you see a connection for the people going through some kind of struggle to inform them how this is a possibility, an opportunity. Oh, then they say to you, oh, that other person's such a, you'll
Yeah.
never get them to the process. Oh my God, they're such, I can tell you stories about them.
Yeah. And I am going to go ahead and share one portion of this
Go ahead.
research because this ties right in with what you're saying. So, across all forms of communication, the parent's perceived capacity to resolve conflict improved by 1.5 points. So, to tie into what you're saying is, so the intake crew, the intake gals, they get that information, and we always assess. And we were doing this pre the research anyway, it was just sort of our own information. We do a scale 1 to 5, tell us your ability to communicate with the other person, resolve conflict. And everybody's always like a 1 or a 2, and we can't talk at all. And then now the research shows, yes, they say that in the beginning, and then post mediation, you give them that same 1 through 5 scale, and now we're looking at 4s. And so, the question for me is at what point, and I don't know if we can ever really assess or figure.
Identify. Yeah.
Yeah, but at what point is there this sort of psychological shift where, and I'm sure it's at different points for different people and depending on the process, but is it during the mediation when they're like, maybe I can talk to this person and they start, or is it sort of this post mediation reflection back on, yeah, I think maybe I could do that now. And the part of the anecdotes, that's where we learned that people were not only feeling like they could do it, they now were having some confidence in doing it without the mediator. So they felt like they had enough tools, enough confidence to be able to have these conversations now without that third party. So I guess tying it back into this earlier when you said, what do you hope for people? Wow, maybe the hope is to not need mediators anymore, right? I don't know. These people can just feel confident enough and have the skills to actually be able to have these hard conversations without someone there to help.
Yeah. And I mean, that was an intention from the work where I was at. It wasn't actually when people had conflicts to, quote, get resolution of the conflict.
Yeah.
It was actually to help equip them
Yeah.
with the skills and the knowledge so that they could better deal with their own struggles and challenges. Capacity building,
Yeah.
personal capacity building.
I do feel like there's this sort of dual process that's happening where there's like the short-term objective. Yeah, let's help you get your stuff figured out, whatever this immediate need. but then in addition to, like you said, the skill building, this long-term problem solving capability, kind of happening all together at the same time. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean the premise is that by equipping people with the skills for them to resolve things, if they're involved in a process, by extension, in the journey of doing the process with the skill building,
Mhm.
that they'll be able to find a way to get the clarity and the decisions they ideally want
Yeah.
from the process, and thus it'll feed into each other, and then it goes into the community where these people can be influential into their communities, their circles, their families, their neighbors, and
Yeah.
then by extension with others that they come in contact, and they can give this ripple effect to affect more change.
Yeah. Well, and just think, I mean, think about the role, being a role model for their kids. That's obviously that my perspective is always working with families. And so now you're teaching your kids how to resolve conflict, how to, have these skills because that's where we learn these skills, right? Like we can, they're not really taught at school, at least in our schools. There's not a whole lot of like social emotional learning curriculum or anything. These are all just a skill set that's learned at home. And
Yeah, yeah. I see a big disconnect. I mean, we're on the same page with that because here it's something that's not traditionally done in the school.
they do
It,
pilot projects. There's a ton of research to show the effectiveness of it, but it's hard, I think, to get funding for that type of thing.
yeah, I've always been like these are life skills,
Yeah.
fundamental life skills, and they would be best to be incorporated into our systems as people journey through those systems to come in contact and then have some transformation of the individual that will then resonate in their relationships. Yeah, that's the same struggle here.
Yeah. And I mean, there's tons of research to show like empathy. These kids are able to understand the different parts of their brain, and thinking about defensiveness and non-defensiveness, and they do mindfulness activities. So
Yeah,
much.
yeah. I mean, there's much more to, that's why we really connected with having this kind of conversation. I see this as a great opportunity for us to, present content in a manner that hopefully resonates with people,
Mhm.
and that future shows will also keep building upon this. We want to unpack the process from starting point, research that helps to contribute to inform it, and also inform society and the policy and decision maker, governments and funders, because a struggle here is about funding for not-for-profits. That's ultimately why the agency, the organization that I was at, it's no longer functioning.
Yeah. My nonprofit before I came on, I think at one point they were slated to have about $800,000. And then my last contract that I have, like for $190,000. So, you're looking at a $600,000 cut over the last decade in our program. It's unbelievable. But
Uh,
that's
yeah,
it.
I want to put it out to the crowd in the bleachers. If anybody has a question or comment you want to contribute, we'd appreciate having that energy to help build upon the conversation. So you do a lot of do you do the processes within of getting feedback forms, pre and then post?
Yeah. So the pre is not too intensive. It's a lot of demographics. So, our federal reports have to have a certain amount of information in them, and that's, income, race, level of education. And then we do obviously assess for domestic violence, safety concerns, and then just looking at their perceived ability to communicate or resolve the issues. And so that's pretty, pretty basic intake that we that we do at this point. But then we do and that is just a one-on-one, that's through the phone. And then the post mediation survey we give now is just through SurveyMonkey. We just do an online one. It's super easy to gather data that way. But I'm still, even though the research is done, I am still leaving it open for feedback for people to type comments and also include their name and number if they want me to reach out to them. And people do, So I'm still interested in that piece. I don't want to stop learning about their perspective of it, good and bad.
Which is about informing your process and your practice to help keep adapting and modifying it so that it's, I say these two words to you, client centric,
Yes.
focused on the people that we work with rather than the people needing to, modify themselves to the process that we do. It's about adapting, modifying the process for the people.
So, that was a conversation you and I have had. So, and, there's no shame in what I'm going to say. For 20 years, our intake process has literally been exactly the same. And I hate to say it, but we just sort of funnel people in and funnel people out, right? Like it's, getting people in and get them to the next step. And so, what this research has me considering is to take it what I would call a more, client oriented process because of having 3 methods of mediation available, asking them about their coping mechanisms. This is a good time, Greg. I've got to share this. I've got to share
All
this.
right, go with it. Go with it.
Yeah. Um,
Though there is a question from the crowd.
oh, how far
You-
after the mediation was over
how,
did
yeah,
oh,
let me say it out loud. How far after the mediation was over do did you do the post?
so usually it's about a month post mediation, just because of our process. Because we technically don't know when a mediation is complete until the mediator gets our invoice in to us. So as soon as their invoice is in, then our staff sends a link. But so it could be a week, it could be a day, it could be a month. It just depends, but usually just a month at the most.
Yeah, and I'll explain about how I used to do things too.
Yeah.
Go into that point you wanted to share.
So, one of the interesting things in terms of the different methods of mediation, we found all of them to be highly effective. And it really just depends on the client's needs. So, go figure, right? This is what we're talking about, a client
Sent,
oriented, client centered process.
yeah.
So this was one, and I'm not violating confidentiality. The study is, the link to this is in your chat, and it's called Mediating Parenting Solutions in the Age of Technology. And Anna Dudafor and Carly Nalon are the authors of it. It's just all my study or all of my nonprofit that they use to gather all the data.
Mhm.
Okay, so this was in regards to virtual mediation. So a gal, she had said, he had been abusive to me verbally and emotionally. I'm able to keep a certain emotional distance and not get too upset if I don't have to be in the same room as him. I'm able to remind myself that some of what he says is inconsequential and doesn't affect me anymore. In our case, any subtle facial expression or body language makes someone quick to jump to an assumption that could be right, but also could be totally wrong. I think it was a lot easier when it was virtual. I was able to focus on the mediator. So that was a theme that we saw, was this ability to focus on the mediator when it came to virtual mediation. So, and I was just thinking about even like the setup of my office. And, obviously they always say use a round table, it's better, da da da. And I totally get it. But the parties are still kind of across from each other um, in that in that dynamic, which I think just the presence of 2 parties being across from each other like that, I think that creates some defensiveness just in and of itself. I have to question, is there a better way to seat them? I don't know. But the virtual seems to take that part out of it. People aren't as triggered. And that was another big theme that our mediators, that was some of the feedback. They said people were not as triggered in the virtual mediation sessions. And so thinking about real fast, Greg, I just got to tell a real quick story. And then
No, take your time.
okay. So in this amazing book, I don't know if you guys have read by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. They wrote the book, What Happened to You? And obviously that's a trauma-informed lens in terms of saying, you know, what's wrong with you? The question, the reframe is what happened to you? Just trying to take that compassionate perspective when we're working with people. So in this book, What Happened to You, I cannot get this story out of my head. So Dr. Bruce Perry was a psychiatrist for a kiddo who was in foster care. And when he was about 5, and I apologize if this story is triggering for anyone, but when he was about 5, he was human trafficked by his parents. This little boy was, not Dr. Bruce Perry, but the foster kiddo. And then he gets taken out of foster care. He gets taken out of his parents' home. He goes to foster care. And then in that situation, the foster parents are physically abusive to him. And there's like physical contact between them. So one night the police get called. He goes, and this fight escalates between the foster dad and the son, the foster kiddo, so much that he actually gets knocked out. So he is unconscious in this hospital bed. And I don't know how they were able to do this or what the ethics are behind it, but the foster child was still able to have supervised visits with his biological dad. So he was still familiar with the smell of his dad, things of that nature, because he was still seeing him through supervised visits. So what they did was they took these clothes from the biological dad and they put them underneath the foster child, and his body completely responded, even though he was in a coma, in terms of disassociation. That was the coping mechanism that he was using when he was 5 years old, and his parents are sending him in to be inappropriately touched. So completely being just disassociate. I've got to do this. This is what my parents want me to do. Then they took the clothes from the foster parent, the dad, and they put them underneath his nose. And he started raging in this bed, having that physical response. So that has made me think about the use of smell in mediation in terms of how triggering it could be for someone who was, if they went through a traumatic response. And so, thinking about is that something we should be assessing for in the beginning? Like, and that sounds like a funny question, but are there certain smells that are going to be triggering or upsetting to you when you come into the mediation session in person? And I think then I started thinking, like, how can we ask these questions in a way that kind of gear us to the right path for what mediation method we should be using?
I totally understand what you're talking about, and I totally support, because it's all about finding ways that is inclusive
Yeah.
for the different natures of people and personalities. I really support the notion of individuality as a concept, that just because we do a process, again, connecting back to the client-centric, we don't expect everyone to be the same.
Yeah.
Come from, we talk about don't make assumptions in mediation or in life. Well, make an assumption that not everybody is the same, nor
Yeah.
should they be, treated the same, that we want to adapt and adjust, customize our approach for the people involved and the individuals. Just because they're going through a similar experience as to issues, they're not going to navigate with those issues the same way as the next group of people. So you
Yeah.
got to adapt it continually, and then finding even more helpful ways to make the process supportive of people and their lived experiences. I celebrate that opportunity to do, and that was the richness of the kind of work that I was involved with.
Yeah. Well, and the other component of it that I feel like we need to start assessing for in the intake, and I think, and I'm using the word intake, and I also, I think of intake as two different components, just real fast as well, in terms of the initial intake that the staff is having. And then there also is where some mediators do a meeting, like an intake at that point. So this could be assessed at either part, at either intake, but I think in the beginning, it could be used in terms of figuring out what method of mediation is going to be best. So, real fast, what we also learned through the anecdotal, how people were coping. So, some examples. People were enjoying the phone mediation because they could pace back and forth while talking on the phone, right? Like you're talking about this right, left, bilateral stimulation, calming people down. That's how people can process by walking
Hmm.
and talking, right?
Yeah.
That would not have been able to happen whether it was virtual or in person, because that would be way too distracting. There'd be a camera moving. That's, if I was walking back and forth, that would be pretty distracting, right? So thinking about the phone, and people were able to push mute on the phone when they needed to cry. Like there was, just a lot of safety, it felt like, in terms of what each type of mediation provided for a particular person.
And I would say empowerment that
Yeah.
leads to self-determination. They had the authority over themselves and the decisions that were best for them to make in that moment and that time about their struggles, their challenges. And I think that's the power of how to create an adaptable and adapting process that is founded on and rooted and functions client centric.
And the tricky part is, when you've been doing a process for 20 years, then just saying, we're going to do something different now, right? Like staff's like, what? And so you're going to figure, so I think, and that also is making sure, I will always preach, if you will, that everyone in the office, every person needs to have the same knowledge as you, in terms of like, everyone needs to know these research results. Everyone needs to understand like the effectiveness of what we're doing. And then also what can we be doing differently and how can we be doing it better? And so I think making sure the staff is trained, like this is going to be, it's going to have to be a policy. I'm going to have to rewrite some of the policy manual in terms of how we do our intake process. So a big change like that, it takes work and it takes time. And I think it's not as easy as saying, oh, we're going to do something different now.
And it's also to, when you're going to take new staff or you're going to take interns or placement students, that you inject in there those types of questions that could, in a gentle way that's supportive of them, provoke them for
Yes.
you to get a reflection from them and they can get a reflection for themselves, because this is your mantra now, this is your mandate, and you want to make sure that you have the components, the critical resources that can help support that journey.
Well, and one of the other things that came through with the research, and I don't know how other people are handling it, and this is where people could provide feedback too, because I feel like we all have to learn from each other. But what was happening is one person would want a particular method of mediation, and another person would another type, right? So they, now they're fighting about which method of mediation they are going to use.
Yeah.
Somebody said, any surprises? And so we are really deferring that to the mediator. That's how, because ultimately the mediator can choose their own process. So I think though, but the feedback is the mediator now feels like they've already lost impartiality, because now they've already made a decision on what type of mediation they want, which may not be in favor of what. So I feel like if my staff can absorb some of that conflict in the beginning by navigating these coping mechanisms and safety and all of these other components of it, then we can sort of prevent the mediator from feeling like they've already chosen sides with someone based upon, a method of mediation.
I had a past show about 3 years ago that was called Lies Our Trainers Tell Us. And one of the things, and I've referred to it earlier about assumptions. We really, as trainers and instructors, teachers, whatever, coaches, try to say, okay, don't make assumptions. Well, there are things we do make assumptions. It's a reality. And neutrality, too, is a nice concept. It's an ideal. In reality, for me, there's no such thing as neutrality. There's some way we influence
Yeah.
the process, we contribute to it. So having your staff or whomever, your mediators, feel that they've taken responsibility, that's a great acknowledgement. At the same time, provide that that's a reality of life. Our physicality, when we go into a room with people
Oh,
and
yeah.
we're different, the color of our skin, the language we speak as our mother tongue, etc., our gender, that contributes to how people process. You talked about, the scent thing, the smell, the aroma. Well, we have to be mindful and self-aware. We as people, as human beings, when we engage with people, we also influence them and we could provoke them in some way. It's how we deal with those moments to, get people to appreciate going deeper, the symbolism of the iceberg. What you see is not necessarily representative of the whole perspective. It's you got to go below the waterline to get the majority. Don't stay on the surface with the what, go into the why. Unpack the perspectives for that.
I wish I could remember this quote, but basically it said the only neutral mediator is a dead one.
And we're not promoting that either.
No, no,
Yeah, so with the community mediation stuff, we didn't call it intakes. Like we had the contact on the phone. We do that conversation. We call it a first contact.
Yeah.
And then if we engage in a process, we call that separate, private, confidential meeting a case development. Though in the family world, they use that a lot here as intake, the separate meeting with the parties. So, it's about adapting into the different environments and cultures of
Yeah.
process with the different terminology and the language, which ultimately is really almost about the same thing. It's just what happens within that space that really can make a difference.
Man, you're making me think. It makes me think like our initial client intake, I almost feel like that's partly a sales pitch. I'm not going to lie. It's partly like all the reasons why mediation is amazing and wonderful and why you should do it, because there's a lot of
Education and informing.
yeah,
You
in
use
addition to some basic, yeah. And then I feel like the things I'm going to put on them is a little bit beyond that, in terms of assessing, coping skills. I think they're fully capable of it though. And then, thinking about the intake with the mediator, and some people do, and sometimes I do this and sometimes I don't. It really depends on the court and it depends on the case. And there's so many variables. Usually if the attorneys ask, because they know that I'll do it, like with a complex case, I'll meet individually first. Um, and then there's some logistics in there. I do cover the agreement to mediate, where they sign everything. But it's really me listening to them and just establishing that rapport and establishing that connection. And I don't challenge them too much. I might ask them some questions like, if the other party upsets you, basically, how will I know? And what are some ways that we can calm ourselves back down? Just a lot of like emotion regulation techniques. And so in 2016, we had done a pilot project on that intake process. And we gave an assessment right before they did the intake with me, and then I gave the same exact assessment immediately post mediation before they left the room. Like before they said their goodbyes, I said, "Oh, here, you got to do this. You know, you got free mediation. It was a grant anyway. You got to fill this out for me." And all of them had experienced growth. It was on different parenting components and conflict resolution. But the one interesting thing again was the anecdotal. And, 2016, we weren't really, at least I wasn't, using words like safe or feeling safe. And like, obviously, we had this element of physical safety. We were always doing domestic violence assessments, things of that nature. But that's really when I started to think about emotional safety in the mediation session, and what that looked like and what that felt like. And so that was some of the feedback that people were sharing was, I felt safe. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a doorway to a whole set of new fun things to explore. Safe. What does safe mean? How do you
Mm-hmm.
know you feel safe? Like what makes it not safe? Like there was just so much there. And that's when I really started creating that trauma informed model, was based upon the feedback from that pilot project. And it all just sort of snowballed because we want people to feel safe, and just when
Yeah. And even going on, when you say the word safe, or we say intake or assessment or screening, a lot of times these words are said in the absence of a connection with them,
connection.
an
Yeah.
appreciation for them, because they just come across as words and there's no sense of passion with it in some way. I believe really when people are connected to the work they do, to do it intentionally and purposely, there's some form of passion. And they appreciate not only what they say, they appreciate more fully how they say it, and they see how it can contribute with how they say it to how someone will process it and make sense of it.
Yeah.
Because just saying it from our own point of view, in the absence of considering the person on the receiving end and how they may make sense of it or not, is a disconnect.
Yeah. Absolutely. So,
Yeah, there was a question that for the person who asked about the study. If you just scroll back a little bit in the chat, it's right near the beginning, the link for it. Or Don, could you put it in there again?
yeah, they would have to.
Laura's sharing that we'll repost it for sure.
Here we go, right there.
There it is.
And if anyone here, I'll put there is a whole page on so the nonprofit I run is called March Mediation. March is an acronym. It stands for Mediation Achieving Results for Children. And on the March Mediation page, there's a ton of resources on there, and the studies on there. And then there's a lot of stuff about trauma-informed mediation on there too.
Yeah. And so let me take with the question also. Any surprises with the research? I would say any unexpecteds from what you found out from the research.
Our sample size was small, so I can't speak in terms of you can't, generalities is not the word I'm looking for. But African American folks chose virtual. And that also, I think, could be a whole discussion on access to justice. And, again, making sure that we're serving all populations and finding ways to serve all populations best.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, my two core values are diversity and inclusivity. The organization was located in North Toronto. It's called Jane Finch. And that community of Toronto has representation of 100 cultural, ethnic perspectives that speak over 120 dialects.
Yeah.
So if we, as an English speaking, or sorry, an English named organization, and that answered the phone in English, If we limited ourselves to that dynamic dimension, how much are we excluding of the community in which we are situated?
Yeah.
So it was an intention of the program that recruiting as many people from diverse perspectives of culture, language, religion, orientation as part of the pool of quote mediator volunteers, because ours weren't paid and they did it for a different dimension.
Yeah.
So that was a fundamental principle and value. We had over 40 different languages as part of that representation. So just because we wanted to be adaptable to the people and their lived experiences. So there was like, if they needed it in a first language, their mother tongue, we would try to have, mediators from that,
Yeah.
or having somebody as a translator in the process that could help support that. Though the assumption was not that just because somebody's from a particular identity group, that they also wanted someone from the same identity group as part of the mediator profile. Because there are times when people do not want anyone from the same culture
Yeah.
because of, well, we've tried the traditional practices that are representative of our culture. We need something else as a change. Or our community is it's small, and we don't want to risk someone from our own community being part of the process that it would then get into the rest of our community. So, it was about finding a way that would work for the people involved continually.
Wow, that's amazing. Takes a lot of resources.
Human resources, because, as a not for profit,
Yeah.
it's limited in the financial resources. So you got to really find a way to maximize your human energy. There were many nights spent at the organization, the office there. I went home like 2 or 3 in the morning, even
Mhm.
though there was an Italian place close by that was open 24 hours. So that was helpful.
Oh my gosh, you made me so hungry just now.
You want something to eat?
Come pick me up. Oh, geez. Oh.
I'll do that for next time.
All right. Sounds good.
So we're at the point of, needing to somehow clarify. Anybody want to further commit to contribute in any way with a comment or a question? And we can inject that as part of this. Going back to, I referenced great discussion. Thank you both. I mentioned earlier about the assessment tools. We created a feedback form. We called it a post-process feedback form. So when the mediators had finished the process, the last in-person session, they had these forms inside the folder when they were at the organization.
Mhm.
They'd fill them out, and it was relative about their own experience of doing the process so that we could get that feedback too and understand that. And then about 3 months after the process, we would do a service evaluation, connect with the clients, the parties, the people, and get some feedback about, okay, how are things at this time? What was helpful from the process? What was something that could have been done differently from the process? And, what do you see as the next step possibly to, build upon where you're at now? And also, is it coming back? Do you need an opportunity to further reinforce or support or deal with any unexpecteds that have happened over the last few months?
Yeah, that's a really good idea. That's one of the things that once we can get a little bit more staff and get some more funding, doing a 1-year follow-up, that would be, that's on my to-do list.
Yeah, so one of my dedicated uh, people who connects every Sunday night, who's actually one of my former volunteers, she wrote a statement. Love that the buy-in from their government court was 600,000. I think you mentioned it was 800,000. Amazing. I think CMSD, where I was at, Conflict Mediation Services of Downshire, function on about 10% of that, correct? Well, it depends on the program. We had funding for different purposes from different government ministries. So that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this is something that we, want to present as an educational piece, an informing piece, and like you said, sell it. Because when people hear a lot mediation, they might say meditation.
Meditation.
I'm going to fly on that magic carpet. There's only one letter that's different from the words. It's the I. It's a continual journey. So, what do you want to see as possibilities for us to present about next time to build upon this?
So I think the next one, I envision that to be, so with this talk, we are focusing on sort of the pre-work, then moving on maybe to coping skills or emotion regulation and mediation. That's kind of, I love stuff like that. And then some of it too and then moving on to like post mediation in the future in terms of, talking about surveys, talking about um, what happens after.
Yeah, how to keep transforming the
Yeah.
process so that it's fluid, flexible, adaptable. I think next time, part of that would be the next conversation could be about what's the lived experience for the mediator doing the process in relation to the people that we support, and then get some perspective, even include some of your research
Yeah.
to contribute, like what was the experience like for the people as participants to the process? What were they going through or thinking or feeling, reacting to or responding to?
Yeah. I've got, and, just through my own mediations, I feel like I've got some stories to share too. Um, some things that happened during a virtual mediation that would never have been able to happen in an in-person. And it was for the good. So anyway, yeah, little
Well,
fun things like that.
well, it's even to take those moments or those events that didn't work as well as they could have or should have, the word should in quotes,
Yeah.
to see how to revisit that and unpack it somewhat to say what happened, to see what didn't happen, to see what we could do next to quote, try to make it happen better.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is interesting to me, I could do the same thing and get a totally different response. And I'm like, okay, how did this work so well the first time with these other people? Or I'll give a training and I'll say the same exact thing I've said 5 times in a row. And all of a sudden I'll have a class and I'll be like, no, you didn't. I'm like, it's people are so funny, that's why I feel like you can never say like, oh, I know how to do mediation, like, and be done with it. Like, it's not a definitive thing. Like it's an art. You have to continually hone your skills. It is not a one and done in that sense. I mean, like, it's an ongoing working project for yourself and your organization. It never ends. You
Yeah.
really make it better.
And I think I mentioned to you in one of our previous Zoom meeting sessions that when someone says, this is how you do mediation, or this is the mediation process, it's prefaced with the, I really get a struggle out of that because it's about the process having so many variables and options, and it can have one solid formal construct of delivery. There needs to be a variety of ways of doing the same thing that is a client centric,
Yes,
focused on the individuals you're working with.
we're getting there.
Yeah, absolutely, step by step.
Forever, we're getting there.
So anything in for tonight, what are you gonna do for the rest of the night? Great dialogue. Thank you. It will be interesting to find out how the mediators are reacting to your study. Are you sharing that with your pool of people?
Yeah, you know, one of the things that I think, kind of tying back into what we started, many of our mediators, actually all of our mediators, it's, mediation is the subset, is the subcategory of professions for them. And so I don't always know or think that they might appreciate the way that I hope they would.
Try it. Try it. You don't know unless you try it.
So, but I'm trying. I'm speaking wherever I can about it. Share the good knowledge.
Yeah. Spread the word.
Yep.
Okay. Um, I really appreciate us having this conversation and look forward to more together. So we'll have to connect offline and figure out the next date together and go from there. And then we'll also have to talk about that tour.
Sounds fantastic.
All right. So thanks very
Okay.
much, Don.
Thank you,
And
everyone, for attending. This was great.
yeah, so we'll have the recording of this done probably for within a week or so. I'll let you know. It'll be posted on Fenton Mediation YouTube channel. At the same time, it's totally my privilege to share it with you and spread the word to go further with all that. We got to collaborate and build upon things because we
Yep.
have a lot in common. And even if we didn't, there's opportunity to create that connection and you know build upon a better society and community.
Sounds great to me.
So nice to see you again.
Thank you.
All right, have a good night.